Welcome to my first tutorial for Miliastra Wonderland. I wanted to make a tutorial that covers the basics, focused on all the tools you need to design the scenery of the Wonderlands. In particular for all those teapotters who want to make all those dream builds we never could in the Serenitea Pot, due to load and other constraints. So even if you have no desire to learn how to make the game mechanics, there are many game creators that are looking for talented Wonderland landscape designers and are willing to pay you legally for your talents. Unfortunately, the Miliastra Design Sandbox is only available for PC players at this point, and you must also have completed the Knights of Favonius subquest in the first Mondstadt Archon quest, called The Outlander Who Caught the Wind. This only takes about 10 minutes from starting the game to complete, so it's very easy to participate in Miliastra Wonderland and to have accounts on all servers. So let's get started. If you haven't found where to enter the Miliastra Design Center, it's under your Paimon menu. I have it circled in yellow on the left. This will open up the desktop area where you will keep all your separate Wonderland game saves. To start a new Wonderland, just click on the Create New Save button. You can also import saves of games you've made on other servers by clicking the Import button. The Upload tab at the very top, though, is for finished games that you have uploaded to the server to be playable, so don't mess with that until you're completely done. Rename your game to whatever you want, and then click Edit. So first we're going to go over the basics of editing the foundation of your build, the terrain. These are the land blocks that you can alter the height or type of terrain, like having pavement, grass, or water, and so on. The default starting size of your terrain is 100 by 100, which is made up of 20 by 20 blocks of terrain, and each are 5 units in length and 2.5 units in height. The size can be changed, but it's important to know the size of your terrain, as this needs to be altered in your stage settings if you increase it. We will go over this later. I also wanted to quickly introduce the keyboard and mouse movement commands in case you're not familiar with it, and I can tell you each time I switch between building in the Serenitea Pot to Miliastra, it takes me a moment to get the mouse controls correct, as the moving of your screen is opposite. So take a screenshot if you need to and keep it handy. Open the terrain management panel by clicking the stack square icon in the upper right. Here you can see the list of all your created terrains. Starting out, you only have one. You can rename the terrain, which obviously would come in handy when you have multiple ones, to quickly tell them apart. If you click on the little map marker icon, it will zoom your screen into the center of that terrain. At the bottom of the menu, you can change the terrain's area material to any of the other brush types. They use the term brush type to refer to the different looks of the terrain, whether like grass or pavement. If you have added more blocks of a different brush type, it would appear in the list here. You can alter that type as well separately. You can move the terrain in the X, Y, and Z axis, or you can change it numerically by typing in the coordinates. To create new terrain that you can move separately, click on the Create Terrain button. This actually takes you to a precise editing screen that we'll go into more detail in a minute. But here you can add more terrain, and you can control at what height in the y-axis by the scroll bar on the right. Here I've created 3 more small terrains that can have their brush type altered and also move independently. If you click on the second button on the bottom icon bar, the one that looks like a land block with the up and down arrow, you can raise the entire selected terrain up levels or back down. The third button in the bottom icon bar allows you to select chunks of terrain to manipulate. It's super helpful and faster than individually placing blocks. Just hold the Shift key and the left mouse click and drag over an area to select. And then you can click Raise or Lower button to add or remove areas of block. After selecting a section, you can also click the Split button, which will make your selection a separate terrain entity. As you can see, it now shows up as a terrain number 2 in your menu on the left. Making small, separate terrains is useful for quickly decreasing the depth of water, for example. Also, you'll notice later when building that if you add blocks of a different brush type within the same terrain entity, there will be a harsh separation line between the different types. This can be preferred in some instances, but if you don't like the look, then having your 2 different brush types as 2 separate terrain entities, you can then move them closer together to make that gap hardly noticeable. There's also a neat tool for mixed movement stepping. So you can pick the increment size you want to move the whole terrain by, or the fixed angle you want to rotate it by. I'm not sure how useful this is in terrain editing, but it's super useful when placing furniture decorations down in the entity placement screen. I would not recommend adding items besides terrain in this screen because if you copy and paste different sets of furniture, you can accidentally copy and paste the whole terrain and unintentionally end up with like 5 duplicate terrains and wonder why your ground is flashing. Alright, so next open up your assets menu bar if it's not open yet. And here you can see all the terrain brush types again, which we are going to look into more detail when learning the precise editing tools of the terrain placement screen. And again, we'll ignore all the furniture items as we don't want to place them in the screen. Precise editing is for working within a single terrain and placing down individual blocks of terrain. There's main categories of creating, deleting, and leveling. First, we will click on the terrain we want to edit, then click Precise Editing. Make sure you have the Create option button selected at the bottom. There's 7 different available brush types, and I'll quickly place them all down here. You can add these brush types to the side of the main terrain, like I'm doing, or on top of the existing terrain. Another Create option we have is for stairs. If I click on the stair-looking icon's second button, we will start with a forward or a straight-looking stair. When you go to place it, if you move your mouse around, you can select the direction the slope of the stairs will face. There are also right and left curving stair options. The look of the stairs depends on which type of terrain brush that you have below it. We can also create water in Miliastra, which is something we've been asking for forever in Serenity, but I wish they would give it to us. It's the third cube-looking icon, so select that. This will turn whatever block you select into a cube of water with the brush type of terrain selected as the ground surface below that water cube. So unfortunately, we are limited in the depth of the water we want to create, as it can only ever be 1 cube deep. The last terrain type that we can create are dirt splotches. I think it is most useful for creating dirt paths over grass or other high-traffic looking warm patches like you'd find in a playground, for example. The last create option that we have on our menu there is to make a single stack of blocks. We can do this up to 6 blocks in height at a time. So next, within the Precise Editing terrain interface, we will be quickly looking at the technicalities of what happens when you delete. I created a section of terrain there in the middle that is 2 blocks thick. When I delete that top block, then the bottom block that is left behind will change to whatever type of terrain is currently selected in the Assets menu to the left. It's also possible to delete a whole stack of blocks at a time. I currently have a line of terrain 3 blocks and 5 blocks thick. I use the plus and minus buttons to set my level, and again, when I delete, the bottom block will change to the type of terrain I have selected when deleting. If I set the number to delete higher than the stack I have, like here I have it set at 6 for a stack of 5, then the bottom block will be deleted and an empty space will be left in its place. The last thing to cover for terrain editing is the leveling option. If we set the depth of leveling to 1, then no matter where I click, the terrain will all level out to that 1 block height of whichever terrain brush type that is selected. If I set it to 6, then it will level out to that height. This is a quick fix if you change your mind and your terrain. Next, I'd like to touch on how you can make multiple environmental configurations, switching the time of day, adding color filters, or weathering clouds. So first I'll add a new configuration and then name them night and day. In the drop-down list, you can choose which players will be able to see this current setup. Select all will be the most typical setting. Click on the background settings and it opens a pop-out of all the preset colors available. Only the purple and the red are dramatically different, but not to worry, there are also filter colors that can be added in combination with the background preset color options. This makes it possible to have dramatic color shifts. Quickly go through a collage of the filters of the background preset colors, so you can see the variety of options available. Next, we have the sky background color options. Whereas the background preset and filters affect the color of how the terrain and the furniture items you place within this terrain will be perceived, the sky background color does not. This color is applied to the sky far above the horizon line. Also, it can be seen in the sky far below. Next, I'm going to switch to the night configuration and click on this toggle button for auto switch at time. With this option off, the time does not progress automatically, and you can select your preferred time. In this case, I'm going to select the time of 23 hours, an hour before midnight. This intensity slider here seems to control the amount of ambient light that hits the ground. So this setting would be particularly helpful to decrease for like max darkness in a spooky build. This blur toggle does just that. It seems to increase the blurring of objects in the far distance so that they appear a bit hazy. Personally, I like to put this at 0 in most of my Wonderlands as I don't like that effect particularly. This is not the weather option of fog, but upping the blur may work well with adding fog. I haven't looked into that yet though. This is a bit weird. Adjusting the density of the stars, it does add more stars, but it makes them smaller and the sky appears to be further away in your perception. Where at low density, the stars are much larger. The strength toggle is for brightness of the stars, and the galaxy is my favorite aspect of the Genshin night sky. It reminds me of hiking deep in the wilderness, where the skies are so dark, no light pollution, and the Milky Way just stretches across from horizon to horizon. It's really such a sight to behold. Totally recommend it. I can even change the color glow of the galaxy. That's pretty neat. The last option on this menu is to add clouds, with a few options of height variation. At all heights, they all appear to be like poofy cumulus cloud shapes. The middle tab of the light bulb is where we can add additional light sources to our environmental configurations. If I click Add Light Source, it opens up this pop-up menu. I can't add one yet because I haven't created a light source. But if we click Open Light Source Manager, we can add one. This app is also accessible through the main system menu, which is that 6-dot hamburger icon in the upper left. Within this manager, we can create any additional light source for the environment as a whole, whereas like light sources for lamps are added to the furniture items directly. There's two types of light, a point or a spotlight, and the intensity, area effect, color, effective range of visibility, and position in space are all adjustable. Now we can go back to our terrain management screen and add our newly created light source. The last tab in the environmental configuration, the little partly cloudy icon, is for weather options. Although sadly, the only current option is for fog. Please give us rain, lightning, or snow. This is another feature we've all been asking for in Teapot forever. With the fog, there's a bunch of parameters here that you can mess with, like the density of the fog or how far it extends into the sky. You can make it look more like a blur in the distance too. Just play around with it until you get the effect that you're looking for. Next up, we will cover tips and tricks of the Entity Placement Editor. This is really where all the fun stuff happens, in my opinion. So first, I'm going to open up the main system menu hamburger icon. I seriously didn't even know it was called that until recently, but now it's just too fun not to say it. Anyways, I'm going to open up the Save Management screen where we first started this tutorial and switch over to another Wonderland design that I have. To continue with what we are just learning, I'm going to show you how to add your environmental configs to the Entity Placement Editor so that you can build in the config that the players will see. This helps with item design placement to get the best view of the moon in the sky, for instance, or knowing how your design looks in different light conditions or filters you have set up. So we're going to open up the quick settings at the top here, the little gear icon, and then scroll down to the bottom here where it says Load Configuration File. If I add or move furniture, the editor now stays in this environment instead of switching back to the default time. The Entity Placement menu on the right here has several categories. The Custom category is where the prefabs you create in that interface will show up. The prefabricated are all the pre-made furniture items by Genshin, divided into two main categories, static and dynamic. The prefab group category is where prefabs you made in a set group will show up. Assets library is for imported items, and the scene generation will quickly create an automated design, although I really don't recommend it. Furniture items labeled dynamic are items that already have the ability to have functions added to them. Most likely because these are objects that Hoyo thought were more likely to be used in game functions. The other objects are called static and don't have that ability, but it can be added, which I'll show you all in a minute. Complex creations are a new addition, and they are the only enemy creations that can have their size scaled. The others, like the slime, sadly cannot. I'd love to have the ability to have little itty bitty slimes for my slime pals game. Okay, so the loot is something you will have to create for yourself. But definitely loot and shops deserves its own tutorial. There's just quite a lot of information to cover. The scene generation is an interface that automatically generates a random scene, kind of like AI, but I don't know what they use for source for the random output. Overall, I wouldn't recommend it to any experience builder as it's quite basic and the layouts don't really make sense. So that's the big categories of objects you can place. Now I'd like to point out some of the tools and settings you can change that can really make the art of building less stressful and easier. Under settings, the ground placement tool is handy to know about. If it's turned on and you go to place a new item, it will always place it down to the terrain height. However, if you turn it off, the new furniture will place wherever your viewpoint is at that moment. So it can be helpful to sometimes turn it off if you're building like way up high in the sky and don't want to keep dragging items up from the ground. The other setting I find really useful to turn off and on in different situations is the center align. This setting is super helpful when trying to align posts like in this branch. It will automatically snap into orientation and place. However, sometimes if you're building in a cramped area with lots of different furniture items, and then you're trying to place a new item in there, it will keep incorrectly trying to align to the furniture already placed, snapping to weird angles. So this is a scenario where it's really helpful to just turn that button off real quick. And here's another feature I really, really wish we had in Serenitea Pot. Just being able to freely rotate and resize all the furnishings opens up so many creative ways to combine them and make new things. Also, movement stepping, just like I showed you earlier in the terrain editing. However, here I think it's much more useful. It's a quick way to evenly space things like street lamps or bushes without having to look at the XYZ coordinates and do math. The fixed angle is very helpful when I've changed my mind about the orientation of a build and have to select lots of items. Then I can set the angle to 90, for example, and cleanly, easily rotate the entire build around. Like the movement stepping, you can set the zoom at a fixed factor too. Although personally, I think it's just easier to type in the zoom, and I really haven't used this tool very much at all. Isn't it just incredible how we are able to select all these flowers and copy and paste? It really makes it so much easier to fill in landscapes this way. Next, I want to point out a couple camera tricks. I really wish I learned this earlier. So the speed at which you can traverse the build is adjustable. But yeah, this camera speed can be altered to your preferences, so super, super fast for me. Also, the horizontal lock may be something you would be interested in changing. I personally like it on. If you turn it off, when you move forward or backwards, you will also zoom into where you are focused on. Three important settings that are available on both the static and dynamic categories of furniture are whether the item has collision. So basically whether you can run into it and touch it, interact with it. And if it does have collision, then whether or not you can climb on it. And lastly, whether or not you can see it. So you can also make things invisible and have the ability to climb on them. When building Wonderlands, you will need to keep the players within the boundaries of your design. Because if they go out and you haven't set up a death zone, like what happens when you fall in the teapot, then the player will just keep falling for infinity. Or they will just get mad and quit the game. One option is to use the cube empty model, which is a dynamic object. Then you can change the zoom parameters to be 50 in height and length, and then just very, very narrow. Don't forget to make it have collision, but not be climbable. Another option that is kind of like making sets in the teapot is the decoration editor. I would recommend using the empty model as the base. Sometimes when you use other furniture as the base item, anything you add will not correctly be rotated or zoomed, and you'll have weirdly skewed furniture. If you put the empty model below the ground level, you don't have to worry about a player colliding with that box and being like, WTF? The decoration editor to make everything one unit is absolutely needed if I want this grocery cart here to have a function, like being able to move around. So I typically do this by just building my full item first, like this entire grocery cart. Then I use the select from scene to add everything to this empty model box. Now that everything is linked together, I can move it around as one item, or as needed in the future, I can add a custom component like a basic motion device. The last skill I want to cover in the entity placement editor is how to turn a static furniture into a dynamic one, so that it can have functions like movement or a nameplate, or there's many numerous options. In my romantic build design here, that column in the center of the gazebo sets off fireworks, but it is typically a static furniture item. Now, if I right-click on the item, this pop-up menu will appear and I can click Save as Prefab. Now I can switch over to that Prefab library editor in the top menu. And here I can find the item I created in Custom Prefabs. When you have your column out on the gray checkerboard area, select Edit, and this drop-down list here, you can change it to be dynamic instead of static. Click Overwrite and Save, and now, as you can see, all the functionality is available, and you can edit in either the Prefab screen here or in the entity placement one. However, do realize that only in the Prefab library can your changes be saved to all instances that you use this column for. So if you place it down multiple times in the entity placement screen, if you make changes in the Prefab, it will change all those instances. You can now find this dynamic column up in the custom Prefab list on your entity placement screen, and you can reuse it over and over from there. Now that we're back in the Prefab library and have Details Editor open up for an item, we're going to ignore this Battle tab and we will be looking here at some of the functions available in the third tab. Click the button Add Common Component and select Basic Motion Device. There's a bunch of different motion options to choose from. Like here, I selected the Uniform Linear option. That determines whether this platform can move up and down, side to side, and how far in each direction the movement goes. It's just edited here numerically. But you do have to have that initially effective button selected, otherwise you will need a no graph to activate your item. You can estimate to begin with, and then go place this platform in your entity placement scene. And adjust the degree and direction of the movement by moving that blue arrow until it's just right and spans the water completely. Another option is the path movement in the basic motion device. This is how I set up the Ferris wheel in this build, for example. It's done by adding waypoints. When I created the Ferris wheel, it was much easier to do that actually in the entity placement screen, so that I can add the waypoints for all of the different seating boxes to line up with the structure of the Ferris wheel as it goes around. The last basic motion device I'd expect you to use a lot is the uniform rotation. For example, for windmills or turbines, or if you create different house fans, just set the time to as close to infinity as you can, and you can increase the speed by increasing the angular velocity or vice versa. The last components I will touch on in this tutorial is adding looping, special effects, and light sources, as those functions are definitely also needed to make beautiful designs. These functions are under the third tab. The VFX component is already automatically there along with custom variables and unit statuses, so just click the Advanced Editing, and then we'll add a VFX component to this empty model box. Only looping special effects can be used without a no graph, as the timed ones only run for a few seconds, would need to be triggered in your game, or they would be over before you even load in to see them. The looping ones obviously run constantly, like in a loop. Unfortunately, there really isn't a good way to view all the special effects, as there isn't a library and a website, So you kind of have to either guess keywords to search or just scroll through and test a bunch. In this case, I wanted a fire effect for my fireplace. And I searched through all the pyro options for a while until I found this one under the pyro halos. I'll adjust the position of the effect. It can be moved any distance away from the furniture model it is attached to. Next, I want to add a light effect for the fireplace because of science. You can't have zero light with excited electrons. Add another common component and search for light source. Then click Advanced Editing. Here I can change the color, the intensity, and area of effect radius of the light. We can preview these effects together. Super cozy. For the fire, I wanted just a point of light, but for an overhead chandelier, for example, a spotlight cone of light works much better. So that's what I have in my kitchen here, and it's fun to play around with the different colors to create a certain mood. The last menu option on the top bar is for the combat preset. It's all very important stuff, but it's not info that is needed in order to just design pre-Wonderlands. So we will just briefly touch on what you can do there, as it would take many more tutorials to cover it all in depth. If you look on the far left there are 5 icons below the system menu. The first one is for making the class level of your character. So this is where you determine whether your players have the ability to run, climb, or glide, if they are newbie level 1s or veteran level 60s, max HP, and attack status. The icon below that is for unit statuses. So this is like in events where you can pick up those little green plus signs that heal yourself, or the ones that grant a speed boost. Also for the effects of being trapped in those annoying abyss mage bubbles or affected by elements. The next icon down is for skill sets. For example, whether they have a bow skill and can shoot or make an aim shot. We'll skip over the projectile icon as I haven't really worked on that and touch on the last icon, which is for your loot and inventory. This is another topic that deserves its own tutorial, but this is where you would set it all up. Miliastra Sandbox is where all the node graph spaghetti nonsense happens. Yes, many of us wish we could just code, but it's really not too bad once you get used to it. The Sandbox is an entirely different window that pops up when you open Miliastra Design Center from the Paimon menu. It will look like these black screens here, and perhaps you may get interested in this part of Wonderland building too. It really is quite fun creating game functionality. I'll just briefly touch on the concept of how node graph setup works. It helps to think of it like a story. The dark pink nodes are the events that must start the story. So think of this collision trigger as Paimon entering a cloud of food aromas. The most simple node graph would be this pink event triggers the yellow action node. What happens when Paimon enters this food cloud? Well, Paimon is always hungry, so she floats towards it. That's the action and end of story. So now I'll complicate the story a bit and add an orange node graph. That one I like to think of as a crossroads or traffic intersection. It's going to parse out the many different action paths our player can take. In this case, it's going to be the 2 different paths Paimon could take when she smells that cloud of food aromas. There's also different blue nodes. These are the detail nodes, the tidbits of information that are needed to determine the choices of our main character. So in this case, we ask the question, is Paimon hungry or not when she enters the food aroma cloud? Whether she is hungry or not would be a custom variable attached to Paimon that may change throughout the day. So in this story, there's only 2 answers. Yes, Paimon floats towards the food, and no, for she keeps yapping at ether and ignores the food aromas. Now I'm going to complicate the story even further. From the previous story, if Paimon was in fact hungry, so yes, now we will ask a further question, where Paimon should go to eat. This question has many possible answers, so we will have to use the multiple branch crossroads node. Whether Paimon chooses to go to the Good Hunter or the Speranza would depend on another tidbit of information, so we need another blue node that would specify where in Tefat Paimon currently is. This would feed into the orange crossroad node here, the multi-branch, and if the current answer is Paimon is in Mondstadt, then the path that would be chosen would be Paimon will head to the Good Hunter to eat. The system menu is the hub of the Miliastra design interface. It's like your computer's start menu. There are numerous tools in the menu to access, and when you open one, it will appear as a tab at the very top of your screen, like here. The most important item in the system menu is the Quick Save button. Click it as often as you can. Here is where you can access the stage settings that I mentioned at the very start of the tutorial, when I talked about the terrain size. You need to adjust this to cover your whole terrain, or you can get an error message and your game won't load when a prefab is outside of this range. In the list down below here, there's the Manage Background Music app, which is key to setting the mood of any Wonderland design. Although we are limited to the pre-selected music and these categories here. There are two options for test play, single, or you can invite a friend to help test play under multiplayer. You will be teleported into your build, and the point you start at will be at the white arrow that you can see and move in your entity placement screen. It's always important to experience your design and look for flaws and movability problems. Even if you don't have to troubleshoot game elements, this is still important. Here you can click your escape button to abandon play. To completely exit the Wonderland Design Center, click this button here at the very bottom, and you will teleport back into Tevat. Thanks so much for taking the time to learn the skills necessary to design fantastic new Wonderlands. I hope you're excited to get started.